Hello, namaste, pranam. Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Akriti Anand from India, and I welcome you all to the world's largest global summit that now goes digital. TIE Global Summit 2020, hosted by the Hyderabad chapter this year, redefining entrepreneurship in the new world. The summit, which is for the entrepreneurs by the entrepreneurs, where we see the brightest minds from the industry come together to share their secret mantras to success, where we dissect entrepreneurship from technical, emotional, financial, political, interpersonal, and all the other perspectives that you can think of. 40,000 plus registrations, over 350 speakers, 20,000 plus startups from across 25 nations, 135 plus investors, almost 100 plus large countries, companies coming for the marketplace where you can pitch your next big idea. 500 plus one-on-one session. And guys, I have nothing more to say because you can see the grandeur of this virtual summit. My friends, we just witnessed the grand opening of day one by Mr. Gautam Adani, chairman and founder of Adani Group, where he gave a keynote address focusing on Incredible India. Can India be the greatest opportunity of 21st century? Now it's time to go global and look at the future. Future specifically with the country that is making waves all over the news. And for this particular session, we have a very special person who's coming over. The conversation is going to be on China 2050, China's path to leadership. And for this session, our guest, who we will be talking to, is Mr. Robert Lawrence Kun. He's the chairman of the Kun Foundation and the recipient of China Reform Friendship Medal 2018. And he's here to share his insights on and propel China to leadership. Joining him in conversation for this fireside chat is Mr. Sanjay Pugalia. He is CNBC's veteran Indian political and business journalist. So, Mr. Sanjay Pugalia, we're really looking forward for this session with Mr. Robert L. Kun. Please take it forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Akriti, and hello and welcome to the TIE Global Summit. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Robert Lawrence Kun, although Akriti has given some introduction, but this is exactly 9 days short from 2 years when Xi Jinping gave him the highest Chinese award, the China Friendship Medal to Dr. Kun. And Dr. Kun has been advising Chinese government and American and Chinese and global companies on business and politics since last more than 3 decades. Another very interesting thing to know is about Dr. Kun is that he is a neuroscientist. He has got doctorate degree in neuroscience. And in the current days of my narrative versus your narrative, it becomes very, very critical to decode the complexities. We have a mind reader like Dr. Kun with us. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Kun is joining from Los Angeles for our viewers to know. And of course, the first question is more simple for me to ask, although we will talk about China's path to the leadership by 2050. But the core question is, who will be shaping the world or dominating the future of the world? Will it be Joe Biden?
Well, I'm often on the borderline between China and the US, and in the United States, I'm often given the way Chinese leaders are thinking. And in China, I'm always explaining why American policy is as it is. So I am always in the minority. So I'm very pleased to be hosted at the TIE Global Summit from India, because now I'm feeling on perhaps more neutral ground. But it's a critical question you're asking. And I would like to look at it in a long perspective, because I actually, although I have been doing most of my work between China and the US for, as you say, 3 decades, since about 2008, I have really tried to focus on India-China relations. My first trip to India about China was in 2008, and I have been there many times. I know there are very many issues, but if I look long term, if the first half of the 21st century will be dominated by US-China geopolitics and business, the second half of the 21st century may be dominated by India-China geopolitics and business. So what we are talking about here really has long-term implications. There are high emotions in both countries. I am very clear to see that both from U.S. China and India China. In the U.S., China is the only topic that unites a very fractious and disputatious political scene between Democrats and Republicans. I challenge anybody to list another subject that will unify both political parties in the U.S. at this time, other than China. I don't think you'll find it. It makes us all smile, but it's also a problem, because in the U.S., there is a decreasing understanding of what's really happening in China. A whole host of problems that are going on. But what it does is the nationalism in both countries feeds each other and creates a vicious cycle of feedback. And that's problematic. Nationalism is built into our genetic nature. It's bred in our bones from ancient times and through evolution, when animals carved out their own territory. We've inherited that and now have exaggerated that with the kinds of weaponry and political activities that we can have. So it's important to understand that and to recognize, patriotism is wonderful, but nationalism can be destructive. And it blinds your capacity to see nuance. And so what I try to do is to really understand how China's thinking. You can disagree, but really understand the depth of it, and vice versa, to show that in China that America is not just trying to keep China down and to destroy China. One example that I use is that if I ask the world, what is Xi Jinping's primary interest? They might say military expansion or economic domination or suppression of human rights. And in fact, if you listen to him, what he has said over and over again is that his most important activity, what he spends more time on than anything else, is poverty alleviation. This, if he had to pick one thing that he wants his legacy to affirm, it is that under his leadership, all extreme poverty has been eliminated this year, which is a big year in China, 2020, a so-called moderately prosperous society, which has been planned for over 10 years, but the elimination of all extreme poverty. We can understand what that means, but to me, that's for an example to understand how that works, gives reason for communication, like between India and China. How you deal with poverty alleviation? What is the structure and how it works? So while I don't foresee any dramatic improvement in U.S.-China relations under President Biden, with the foreign affairs team, diplomatic team he has assembled, I look forward to a bottoming out and a gradual improvement over the next 18 months.
Do you think Biden will be under pressure because of this narrative of nationalism, where he will have to do a lot of balancing? His catchphrase is China must play by the rule, otherwise ... So do you think he will be under pressure? So in that situation, what will be the catchphrase? Cooperate and compete, or compete and confront?
Biden will, by nature, is cautious, but he has said very clearly that many things that China is doing is a negative. He has been, as we know, attacked severely by President Trump in the campaign as being soft on China. President Trump made an extremely, I would say, funny remark, but it's a serious one as well, where President Trump said that if Biden is president, China will own the United States, not dominate, but would own it. And of course, then his family was accused. So there are pressures on him not to look soft on China. But I've been pleased that at least his initial remarks are going above that and looking at the bigger and the broader picture. Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State to come, has a very engaging approach to leadership. The team he's putting together is a good team. So I look for no further deterioration and a gradual improvement, which will be good for everyone and good for the world. And that doesn't, sweep away a whole set of issues that are going on, which we have to deal with.
Sorry, I have a quick question. Maybe it is a matter of the past now. And this is a provocative question. Everyone says that Trump was tough and China and US relations totally deteriorated. But he was a big sycophant. He wanted Xi Jinping's help to win this next election also. And he was helping Huawei. He was getting angry on his former secretary.
Yeah, for sure. And the report was that he was very, very happy to support the Chinese activities in Xinjiang province. Trump is very transactional. I mean, he was very interested in winning the election, and the economy and the stock market were critical elements in that. His approach to economics and the numbers he throws around, don't, shall we say, work well together. And no economist would say what Trump says is correct, although he had a gut feeling of perhaps putting pressure. The Chinese leadership and people couldn't decide whether they thought Trump was good for China or bad for China, because those who thought he was good for China meant he was so disruptive to everything else in the world that it made it easier for China to go forward. They had a nickname for Trump, which was Jian Guo. Jian means build and Guo means country. It's a popular name in China. So build the country for Trump meant that he was building the Chinese country, which was a sort of a sarcastic name. But others recognized that by his toughness and disruption actually hurt. So senior leadership would actually prefer more stability so that they could communicate. There'll be very substantial differences on a host of issues. But if there's stability, the feeling is that progress can be made and business can be done. And in the macro scale, we could spend the next 2 months talking about each of the issues and really get into it and enjoy it very much. On the micro scale, I really believe that this is an interesting time for really good companies in problem areas like the US that have issues with China and India in particular, to do business in China. Because the Chinese leadership, even though they talk, tough, the so-called wolf warrior diplomats, which, sound good in China, but have deteriorated China's image all over the world quite dramatically in the last year and a half or so. Notwithstanding all of that, they want to send a signal to the world that they are open for business, that they are engaged with the world, because this is what the Chinese economy really needs and what they need for innovation. They need that interaction. So, for example, they've made the whole island or the province of Hainan into a free trade zone. They really want to develop that. Well, if they have poor interactions with the world, people are going to shun China, which they're doing now. So leadership will want to look for ways to reach out to really good companies that can do business in areas, particularly in areas of innovation. So I think this is a unique time. And China, a lot of criticisms around, but there are a lot of positive things too. China has a very long memory for people who help them when they have had trouble. President Nixon, who was derided in the United States because he reached out to China throughout his life, he was honored in China, even though he was a reprobate in the United States and other places. And so companies that would make an effort into China now, and they'd have to be very specific in how it would be done, I think would have long-term success.
Right. So the current narrative was, and give us some clarity on that, because some of us still believe that now companies will move out, and they are moving out of China, number one. Number two, there will be the restructuring of supply chains, and countries like India will benefit a lot out of it. And China needs to be punished because of the way it behaves. And that is why there is a need of a big international alliance. So US, European Union, Australia, Japan, India, Malaysia, Vietnam, they all will join this alliance. Is it a theoretical talk?
Yeah, yes, this is absolutely an accurate description of how people are thinking, and there is great legitimacy behind it. But if you really try to dissect out and see what the issues are, it's not so simple, because the reaction against China are on very specific kinds of things. China is obviously the second largest economy in the world. They will be the largest at some point on a gross basis. They are right now on a purchasing power parity basis, PPP. But in the future, they'll be on an absolute basis. They're the largest trading partner with virtually every country on earth. And so this is a progress that is going forward. The alliances of what we call of democratic countries is an important factor, because if everybody goes alone, then some of China's views, control of information, and imposing some of those external controls are a very negative thing that all democratic countries would react against. On the other hand, the kinds of business that China wants to do, if you're in China and talking to people, their primary interest is increasing their own standard of living, and doing it in ways, particularly on poverty alleviation, which is the biggest factor in China. I've been working on that for years. I've tried to kind of interact between India and China on poverty alleviation. I've written on that because this is an area that everybody can work together on. And the same is true in business. So China wants to show the world that it is a responsible power, even though it has critical differences with respect to territoriality, which from China, the 100 years of humiliation, China feels that very strongly. I mean, everybody feels humiliated to some degree or another. India certainly has had its share, but China feels it perhaps more in the present. Maybe that's manipulated, but whatever it is, it's a real feeling. But putting that aside, by building the economy in China as the primary thing and standard of living, China will need to reach out to more and more international companies.
Yeah. So look, let's focus on India, and then we will move on to their 2050 plan and how it is going to play out going forward. India was really neutral, and we developed great relationship with China. We were talking about Asian century, and we always believed that India and China will lead that century. But suddenly we feel betrayed. We think they are aggressors and China is a bully because what they have done a few months ago in our northern side of border is unacceptable to us. Now we are so angry that we don't even take the name of the country. That kind of anger we see in the political establishment and among the people also. Why would China misbehave with India?
Look, that's a great question. And if you think you're going to get a good answer from me, you're wrong. There are things, I understand a lot of things about China, and I know a great deal of them firsthand from very senior leadership. I cannot give you a good answer to that question.
I want your contrarian answer. I asked question with a bit of a patriotic tenor, but I want you to be blunt with me.
Well, I am. And, I don't like to say that I don't know things. I like to pretend I know everything about everything. Science, politics, but this area, I used to say this about North Korea. I used to say, going back, I don't know, 5-10 years, when I was asked about North Korea, I can say, look, I can tell you a lot about China. I can tell you how the leaders are thinking, but I can't explain why they continue to support this regime in North Korea. I think I can do that now. One of the ways that problems in China are legitimately understood is to distinguish between local government and local activities and central government. For example, China had many scandals in food poisoning and in cover-ups of food poisoning in China. And people would say the Chinese government covered it up. And in fact, it was true. The Chinese government was covering it up, but it was the local government. And the local government covered it up because they were worried that if the senior government found out about it, they'd be fired or put in jail. The same is true on COVID-19, which we haven't talked about. It's very important to understand China because the system that they have in China, the party government system, 5 levels of governmental control in the party. They have party secretaries, central government, and then 5 levels of local government, provincial, municipal, county, township, and village. Very structured. That system that was able to control COVID-19 because they could absolutely, with draconian measures, shut down what they had to shut down with no exception. If you violated something, you were put in jail. I mean, it was brutal, but it worked. But that same system delayed the communication from the local level because of this concern of the hierarchy and the single party system. It delayed the communication of information to Beijing by days or weeks, but what it was critical. And so you really have to understand how the system works to do that. Now, the problem is I cannot use that same argument to apply to the China-India border and the line of actual control. I cannot use that because I cannot imagine a local commander taking action that would cause the huge disruption that it did. I can't make that. And now it is possible because we've seen this with local diplomats who suddenly burst out with a very aggressive, ridiculous conspiracy theories that try to show that the COVID-19 came from the US or came from Australia. Now I hear somebody said it came from India, trying to muck up the conversation so the blame is not exclusively on China. And people get applauded for that in the domestic market because they're standing up for China and not letting China be smeared or attacked. And so those people are being rewarded by promotions and so it is possible that something could be occurring. But as I said, I think I have to reject that because of the nature of it and to look to the fact that China is in a sensitive place now. And we can talk about the various efforts that the party is making and Xi Jinping is making to control all aspects of society, because in 2 years, there's a very critical event occurring. Every 5 years, the party Congress meets. And although it's a rubber stamp superficially, behind the scenes and preparing for it, it's not a rubber stamp. It's sometimes vicious internal politics and movement. And at the next party Congress, the 20th, by all previous standards and precedents, Xi Jinping should retire and a new party secretary come for 2 5-year terms. But virtually certain that won't happen. So that is a sensitive thing. So Xi Jinping has to consolidate, and there's great support for him to do that because the economy needs to grow. The international environment China's in has been disrupted and uncertain, and China's being attacked. So people will gather around their leader. So it is possible and logical during this period to the next 2 years, to the 20th, which would be October, November of 2022, that the Chinese leadership under President Xi needs to look strong in protecting all aspects of China. Sovereignty is at the top of the list. We see it with the China-India border. We see it more so in Hong Kong and in activities around South China Sea and Taiwan. So there are a whole bunch of issues that reflect on it. And so if that's true, I would hope that post-2022, after there is a recognition that Xi Jinping is going to be the leader for the foreseeable future, I would say into the 2030s, 2035 being a special date, that I think is a target date for President Xi's leadership, another 15 years. We see that through various plans being put together now, that as that begins to develop, that China under Xi at that point being more solidified will take a more even-handed and expansive view of its relationships. But I can't tell you that's my prediction. I can only tell you that's my hope.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to ask. You have given us a great insight about how China would be thinking, and this is very critical, and that will impact India. So, what would be your prediction? Because then it looks like that in short term, India and China tensions are not going to get cooled down, and we will have lots of issues. So, what would be your prediction or advice?
Well, the advice is clear. The prediction is less so. The advice is for both sides to maintain the status quo. I mean, that's just good advice all over, especially with Taiwan and India border. Just keep it where it is. My hope is that post 2022 we'll have a more nuanced and a more reflective approach in China, a more confident China. My argument to China is that they should be confident in what they've achieved. They have every right to be. It's been a remarkable economic development, and they should have more confidence in that. We see that when some American basketball coach makes a quip, that all of China goes into paroxysms and causes a great concern because they feel insulted. I'm not saying they shouldn't be insulted, but it's a huge country and second largest. You don't have to be so sensitive because you should be more confident. I hope that China post 2022 will be more confident because really the China-India relationships are critical for the entire world. It's not just the line of actual control. It's for the entire world. The stability of the world really needs to depend on it.
Yeah, this is a bit of a micro question because you mentioned about the status quo. So the status quo that India wants is pre-May 2020. I hope you mean the same.
Yeah, I am not. I've followed it, but I don't know the specifics of who does what. But wherever they are right now, there is great pressure on each side not to give anything different than it is now.
Yeah, and India's bottom line is that you should go back to your old position.
No, I understand that, and that is a difference. And China, it would be difficult, I would say, for China to do anything that publicly will look like a retreat between now and 2022.
Do you think that in the big picture strategy, China might have made tactical mistake because it might have now made India's situation easier? Now India can decide to take sides and align more with US and other Western democracies and create a sort of big strategic alliance.
You know, if I were giving advice, China's behavior on the Indian border would not have been what it was. But there is a bigger picture here, and that is as China sees its broad vision going to 2050. I think it's important for people to understand what that is, because how China sees itself is very important. We're here very narrowly looking at what's happened in the last few months, with good reason, by the way. I understand that. But to see the bigger picture is very important to appreciate where China is going. So China wants to, leadership wants to consolidate its current position with President Xi in charge, absolutely in charge, so that for the next 15 years, the political stability is sure, so the economic and other development geopolitically can go forward. So given that condition, where does China want to go? So let's see. China has had two big strategic visions over the last 10 years. One is the year 2020. We're just finishing now. And that is to create what they call a moderately prosperous society, which meant doubling the GDP and income per person, per capita, of 2010 in 2020. And China will achieve that, and getting up to about 10,000 US dollars per capita, which is really quite remarkable, plus the elimination of all extreme poverty, which Xi Jinping himself added as a requirement to reach this. And the reason this year is important is 2021, next year, is the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. Then going ahead to 2050, 2049 is the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. So they call this the two centenaries. This is the big overarching goal. And what is China's goal for 2050? That's important to understand. So China has listed some adjectives very carefully picked. These are not random adjectives, and they're not in alphabetical order. So they're very important. So prosperous is number one. Strong is number two. Three is democratic. Four is culturally advanced. Five is harmonious. And the sixth and last one is beautiful. So those are the six characteristics that China self-imposed on itself where it wants to be in 2050. Now, each of these terms mean something different in China than they might for us, speaking English as a first language. Democratic doesn't mean the same thing that it would mean to us, obviously. Each of these words are picked because China is not that way today. So it's not harmonious, not good. They want to achieve this. Now, there's one other factor involved, which was stated at the last Party Congress in 2017, three years ago, which was a very shocking statement. And that is China by 2050 will be moving to the center stage of the world. Now, that was a phrase that was said clearly. And then when I repeated that on Chinese media, some media executives censored it because it was so alarming to them, even though their leaders were saying it. But this is very clearly their objective. Now, what does that mean? They say it does not mean replacing the US, but that denial is not taken totally seriously. So China sees a world in which China would dominate not in a colonial way or a neo-colonial way, but where China's values, Confucian values and humanism and development and people-oriented become predominant, and that there's no interference across borders as they would accuse the US of doing. That's their big vision. It's mostly a domestic vision, which is why I think to achieve that, they will reach out to foreign companies to help.
Right. We have only 2 minutes to go, so and we can talk a lot. So quickly, I want to have a kind of conclusion from you. Does America have a plan to counter such a long-term, aggressive, clearly thought-out plan? And what are the opportunities for entrepreneurs in such a conflicting situation?
Well, I think the latter is easier to answer. The former, in terms of U.S. plan, Trump did not really have a plan. He had specific things that he did and liked to talk about, but it was not a coherent plan, and it really did not further American interests, other than coalescing a great number of Americans to recognize that China is something that has to do with it. Biden is starting by making two approaches that I think is excellent. One is that U.S. cannot go alone. U.S. has to engage its traditional allies, particularly in Europe and Japan, who the previous administration or the current Trump administration would not infrequently antagonize. So we want to bring those into a coordinated effort to deal with China. And the second is that the best way to compete with China is to build America domestically, infrastructure, education, research and science and technology. In my opinion, the dumbest thing that America does is restricting the high-level immigrants. So this is not original for me, that the best strategy American can have, if you get a PhD in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, or math, if you get a PhD, you get a green card stapled to your diploma. And you don't even have to ask if you want to be a citizen, you get it. That is America's strength. I had a very high-level Chinese expert who advises top leaders told me that he had an argument with his professor in the U.S. and he said that China will overcome the U.S. because China has 1.4 billion people. The U.S. has only 330 million. So inevitably, given a bell curve of distribution of people, China will overcome the U.S. And the U.S. professor said, no, you're wrong. The U.S. doesn't have 300 million. It has 7 billion because it draws on the whole world to do that. And so that's that is the best American policy short term. There's no short term fix. Keep relationship calm, build America, build alliances, and have direct and direct conversations with China on sensitive issues. I mean, that's the thing. For entrepreneurs, as I said, it's not for everybody, and
Yeah.
supply chains are going out of China. So India, other countries can benefit from that in terms of low value add and low gross margin. But in particular areas of technology or specialized areas that are important in a new economy, I believe that there is great opportunity, and it will be supported by China because they don't want to look weak and compromising, but they do want to send signals to the world that they really do want to engage with the world. They don't want to alienate the world. When Tesla was able to build a wholly owned auto plant for the first time, that was a signal that China will make changes in order to engage the world's best force. So, I would think, although it's difficult to do today, I would love to see more first-class Indian companies working in China and partnering with Chinese companies in India. I mean, that's a small step forward.
Great. Extremely insightful conversation, Dr. Kun. We could have continued, but there is a time constraint. But you challenge lots of stereotypical thinking, and that clarifies thoughts of many stakeholders. I'm sure the audiences have benefited a lot from it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's a pleasure.